So today we're in the Almost Aviation experimental backup cockpit. You may be aware over the last couple of months I've been trying to add side views to my Twin Otter cockpit, and that hasn't really worked very well, so I've given up on that. But the PC I have down here is the PC that I put together to drive those side views, and I've also rescued the screens and I've added a third one. And the idea behind this is that sooner or later I'm hoping to install these as a triple widescreen display in my Twin Otter cockpit to replace the older and smaller monitors that I'm currently using. Those are 19-inch 4x3 monitors. And so what I thought I would do is just try that out by hooking these up to the what is now a surplus FSX PC. It has the Steam Edition installed on it, just to get some sense of how this is actually going to work. Now, I didn't expect very much from this experiment beyond getting some kind of visual sense of how the triple wide display will look with screens this large. I've actually got them set up in a portrait orientation here. I'm revisiting an experiment I did with much smaller monitors 2 or 3 years ago. In the Twin Otter, I think I'm going to have to install these in landscape orientation, and of course the great advantage of that is it'll give me a much wider and potentially more of a wraparound view, and also a bit more vertical real estate. So we've got 56 extra pixels in the vertical direction, but also that's spread over a physically larger dimension. So I think we've gone from 30-ish centimetres tall to 40. And of course width-wise there's going to be no comparison. This is going to be massively wide. But for now I've set it up just to get an impression of, I suppose, performance. I wasn't holding out too much hope for performance. We're driving, don't forget, 50% more pixels than we're driving with the Twin Otter cockpit display at the moment. And given that I'm running this on the backup PC, which is a relatively old-fashioned PC, I presumed it wasn't going to be much use at all. But actually I've been pleasantly surprised, well, amazed actually. The performance I get from this PC driving these 3 screens apparently exceeds the performance of my main FSX PC, which is the one that's running my Twin Otter cockpit. Now, how can this be? Well, I can't explain it, but I mean, I have an idea. If we just run down the hardware that this is running on, well, in fact, if I start with the Twin Otter cockpit itself, that's running on an i5 2550K, I believe, and it's clocked natively at 3.5 gigahertz, but it's overclocked to 4.6 gigahertz. It has 8 gigabytes of RAM installed. It has an NVIDIA GTX 670 card with 2 gigabytes of RAM. I think that's all I need to say, and it's driving a 4066 by 1024 widescreen display. That's a little bit over 4 megapixels. By contrast, the backup cockpit is running on a very old school PC. It's a high performance workstation motherboard, but it's got sitting on it a Core 2 Quad, well, actually a Core 2 Extreme. I think it's a 9770 CPU, which is running at stock speed. That's 3.2 gigahertz. We've got 4 gigabytes of RAM installed, and we've also got a different video card installed. That's an ATI Radeon 6990. Now, I think this is going to turn out to be the dark horse really that's making the difference. That's a dual GPU video card, and it has 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's 2 gigabytes per processor. And just doing a bit of googling, that's, well, I thought that was roughly equivalent to the card I have in the other machine, which is the GTX 670. Now, that said, I think the comparisons I've seen are for the GTX 670 with 4 gigabytes of RAM. I only have a 2 gigabyte version. The only other differences are, I mean, this is running Windows 10 instead of Windows 7. Can't imagine that makes such a difference. and it's running the Steam edition of FSX, which is known to be somewhat optimised over the boxed edition, but again I can't imagine it's accounting for the what appears to be a significantly superior performance. I mean, running this without weather, this is giving me, and with a third-party add-on aircraft, I'm using the Relay Scout at the moment as my test aircraft, that's given me a performance of, in terms of frames per second, we're consistently getting 50 to 60 frames per second, and it's just very smooth. Anybody that tells you that anything over 30 frames per second, by the way, doesn't make any difference, basically hasn't experienced it. I mean, this is just so much smoother at 50 to 60 frames per second. With weather running, I'm running Opus FSI for the weather engine on here. With weather included, I get roughly equivalent performance to the Twin Otter cockpit. So we're getting, 20 to 30 frames per second, and not as smooth, but acceptable. I mean, as good as the Twin Otter cockpit, essentially. And don't forget, that's with 50% extra pixels. This is not far short of a 4K display, effectively. We're 3,402 pixels wide and 1,920 pixels high. So it's not 4K, that will be 8 megapixels to generate. This is roughly 6 megapixels. So it's essentially, the experience is very much what you'd get if you had a 55-inch 4K TV. And it's much different to running a 55-inch HD TV, which would be essentially 1080p, 1920 by 1080. That would just look well fuzzy at this size. But running 4K movies on this, or indeed running FSX, just looks amazing. I mean, obviously we've got the bezels, which do intrude, but you very quickly learned, and these are relatively thick bezels. If you're going to choose panels to run in this orientation, you need to be careful of the physical design of the panel. These have got these little humps at the bottom that all it is a thing, that a little part of the moulding that says Samsung on it. If I was going to do this for real, and this was my permanent setup, I'd probably just file those off so they're flush with the bezel. Then we'd have a much narrower bezel. So anyway, for now, this is my experimental second cockpit. I'm running the Elite yoke here, which is a great yoke. I'm running the Cytec pedals, you probably can't see this from here. And I've just got a sort of makeshift setup to mount the screens. I've got the track IR as well, so we'll see that in operation. And I'm so pleased with the performance of this. I'm going to leave it set up for a while and just experiment. I mean, this thing with the video cards really got me thinking, how I can improve the Twin Otter cockpit as well. I mean, the obvious thing to do is to try taking this card out of here and installing it in the other PC. It's not completely straightforward, largely because I need to buy a whole bunch of cables to be able to plug in my Ultra monitors. But the other thing I'm thinking about is starting to experiment with prepared and even, dare I say, X-Plane 11. I'm not looking at the minimum specs for X-Plane 11. I don't think that's going to run well on this PC. I mean, don't forget that's a 64-bit program which uses DX12, and at the end of the day, this is a fairly weedy computer. It's only got 4 gigabytes of RAM. If I'm going to run X-Plane, I only need 16 or more, I think. But there you go. I mean, that's just something to think about in the future. Okay, so we'll go for a little ride. We're in the Relay Scout. We're at Walker's Island. So I've got the weather largely turned off here. We've got fair weather, just so we can see that smoothness. And this is a top heavy scenery, don't forget, Walker's Island. Beautifully smooth. One thing that you are going to notice as we go, I haven't got the vertical sync to work with this video card, so we do get some, we'll get immense tearing effects. If I just nod up and down, you can see that, you know, it's fairly grotesque on the instrument panel there. So we'll have to try and figure that one out. So there's Orcas Island down there. Should have had a better look at it as we climbed out there, but the other thing I've got turned on here is the Opus dynamic head movements, which I'm not sure if I like these yet. On the other PC, you may recall I use ECCA, which gives me the cockpit movement effects. You can see that shaking, that juddering effect there. Now you might mistake that for stuttering in the display, but it's actually the dynamic head movement effect introduced by Opus. You can turn that off and it's a lot smoother, but I'm experimenting with that for a minute, just leave it on for now. So I've got my frame rate counters showing, just so I can keep track of that. Don't forget, you know, again, people will talk derisively about monitoring frame rates, but don't forget it's the only objective metric that we have of performance. And I'm running it unlimited at the moment, and I have, well, it's hovering around 45, obviously quite variable. But if I were to enable the dynamic weather, we would see quite a drop in that. And again, this is a top heavy scenery, and it's not like it's everywhere. This is Pacific Northwest with Orcas Island, and you know, it's quite demanding on any PC. So we're heading for Clam Harbour, which is that airfield. You probably can't make it out. It's just at the end of that road ahead, going from left to right, and this is a very tricky strip. So we're going to put the flaps down, we're going to put all the flaps down, which in this aircraft is a lot of flap. Check them out on the wings. We're going to squeeze into a little gap in the trees. And we're going to very carefully manage the speed. If we get any wind shear here, this aircraft doesn't like wind shear very much, so we could just drop out of the sky. Give it a bit of a slide in. Bit of a bounce there, but that's okay, we're going uphill. Should easily stop at the top of the hill. There you go, Clam Harbour. It's a tough strip to get out of, never mind to get into. You've got 2 notches of flaps, lift off at 50 and thread it through the trees. Not pulling too hard. The other thing I didn't say is I'm running Rex textures on here, and again due to this extra performance I can actually run 1024 pixel cloud textures with no discernible performance hits, and that makes things look just so much better, particularly when you're up there in the clouds or near the clouds. They're much more realistic. Now on my Twin Otter PC, that's just too much of an overhead. It's all about compromise really. I've got the FSX anti-aliasing on. Again, I haven't managed to, it just seems to ignore the, if I create a profile for FSX in the ATI control panel, or Catalyst control panel, just seems to ignore it, so I haven't got it to control the anti-aliasing through the video card. You can turn off anti-aliasing altogether, and it looks a little bit notchy around the peripheries of the aircraft model, but actually it's not too bad at all. But on the other hand, it doesn't give you a significant, as far as I can tell, performance benefit, so I'm basically leaving it on. Using the electric trim switches on the yoke handle at the moment. Again, it's just nice and smooth. And the ground textures are keeping up. On the numbers. There we go. We're parking on the fuel pumps.